Thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much. My name is Romy Beard. I'm the head of publisher relations at Kronos Hub, and I also run our monthly webinars. We've had a little bit of a break over the summer, so we're back now. We've got a series of 4 webinars scheduled up until Christmas, and we've got some information of those at the very end of the webinar. As usual, the webinar is recorded, so if you're not able to listen for all of it, or perhaps you're watching the recording, don't worry about it. We'll email out the recording to everyone, and it'll go on our website as well, so you can catch up at a later date. So what we're here to talk about is open access challenges for small publishers. I've got 3 speakers with me here today. James from Whitehorse Press, and we've got Tony Gunnison from Wisconsin University Press, and Philip Clancescope from Common Ground Research Networks. So we'll hear from these 3 speakers a little bit about the challenges they faced, a little bit about their organization, especially in relation to open access. So in terms of format, we've got some short presentations, about 8 minutes each, from each of the speakers, and then we'll go into a discussion around some of the challenges they've talked about before we move on to talking about what's next. And we'll have some time for questions at the end. But also, if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to put them in the Q&A and or the chat box. I'll keep an eye on that, and I may be able to weave them into the discussion part of the webinar. So in terms of challenges then, you might think that all small publishers have the same challenges when it comes to open access, but what we'll hear today as well is different perspectives around some of those aspects, and we'll talk a little bit about funding requirements, how that affects some publishers but might not affect others, subject area that the publisher is publishing in, but also technical requirements and how that can affect some but not others in a different way. So I'm really looking forward to this. So first off, to Philip from Common Ground Research Networks. Over to you, Philip.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you for bringing together this session, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and the conversations that we'll have. So for a bit of context, Common Ground Research Networks publishes 67 journals, predominantly in the arts, design, humanities, and social sciences. 53 of those are hybrid, and 14 of those are fully open access. The fully open access are our Spanish language journals. In 2021, we published 843 articles with 130 of those open access, about 15%. And already this year, we have seen growth in our open access content. But again, that is primarily in the Spanish language journals. Our OA approaches right now, the green OA is really a response to, transformations in the European research community space. We are keen to make sure that our authors are able to publish within our journals, but also are in step with the requirements of their countries. That's been an important step for us. While we're based in the United States, we have an international authorship base, so that's a baseline that we have done across all of our journals. As I said, we flipped our Spanish language journals to gold open access. That process started about a year and a half ago, and we're now fully flipped. That was a complicated process, but we're at the other end of it right now. All of the other titles that we have are hybrid open access. We've also tried to make that as affordable as possible, because when you're dealing with particularly arts and design and these research communities that are not as familiar with open access and the price points that have been become the norm in science and technology publishing. We've really tried to make it as an affordable price point as possible. We've also tried read and publish and subscribe to open. That's an ongoing challenge. You know, it's kind of principles that we are committed to understanding. But again, this is one of the areas that kind of brings us together to talk about what are the kinds of strategies that we're going to have to go forward. What's our big drive for OA? You know, one of the things which is important to be clear to begin with is that we all, you know, believe in the principles of accessibility to the content that we produce. You know, that's a baseline fundamental. And so, you know, this kind of drives our thinking about all models that exist around the production of scholarly communication. So we're trying to forecast the future, and it's a kind of difficult forecasting. We look into the tea leaves right now, and there's continental approaches to open access. You know, there is a whole ways of framing where the publishing industry will be going. And so we're trying to make sense of that based on these principles. So we're really thinking about what's our organizational sustainability. That's a very important part of what we are trying to do here. Is we have a, you know, wonderful staff that are professional people that are committed to our authors and our research communities, and it's very important for us to make sure that we can, you know, continue to do the things that we do. The other thing is that we are considering what are the short and long-term possibilities of access, distribution, and accessibility to the content of our authors. So, you know, this kind of two-pronged thing is working on the kind of advocacy of our content, of our authors, but at the same time trying to find a way to be sustainable through particularly this transition period where everything's on the table. So this is our big push, but you know, it's very important to be clear that, you know, that there is a fundamental that I believe that everybody in the industry, as we come into it, is that we are committed to the principles of the publicness of the things that we do, and the economic systems that sit around it are the area in question. What are other things that we are doing? You know, as we flipped to online conferences for our scholarly communities for the last 2 years, we built our own tool, our own infrastructure. And one of the things that we did is each of our presenters have these presentation pages where they upload digital content. And we think this is going to be a new kind of information object in the scholarly communication ecosystem. And so we've been working on and thinking about ways that we can not just close this off to the people who had participated in that event or the research group itself, but make that content accessible. So that's a kind of space that we've been experimenting with as well. You can jump to the next slide. So, you know, 3 of the challenges that I'd like to talk to today of this transition is one, what I call being on the front line. You know, is that when you're in the arts and design and humanities to a certain degree, is that a lot of our authors are not familiar with the kind of open access principles and business that, you know, and the fee system that comes with it. And so one of the things that happens is that we are, you know, continually translating, this staff is translating what it means, why there are now APCs and that sometimes can be a kind of testy conversation. You know, so and it's not just within disciplines, it's within different countries as well. You know, as we are, you know, they're trying to explain the model, and why, all of a sudden you're at a point where there is a fee introduced. That's something that our staff, that we continually try and train and translate and understand. But that's a kind of frontline pressure that's important for us to recognize as a real factor in the staffing experience or the publishing professionals experience, particularly in contexts like us where we're transitioning. It's not like we began open access, and so if an author has had a long-term experience with you, and then all of a sudden you say, well, here's a set of fee options to you to transition your work to be open access, and they're not familiar with the resources that may be available to them to have that happen, or then it feels like there is something broken in that workflow system. The other thing which has been a real challenge for us is new data infrastructures. So, firstly, the collection of the kinds of information, if pace and speed is an important part of, or has become a characteristic part of open access, if a kind of, how you're transitioning has been this other kind of data point, these are things that we have tracked in certain ways and we haven't tracked in other ways, and these new kinds of expectations of the data that you need to collect and transfer to institutions, bodies, databases, for them to be able to display that data for authors to make decisions, can be a very time-consuming and complicated sphere to engage in. So, I feel sometimes I'm stuck in Excel hell. I think it's just creating and recreating these documents, and also and always not always being sure which of these spaces will be valuable in the long run to make sure that your content is visible, and that authors are able, when they're looking to make decisions of where to publish and how to publish, that you still exist within that space. The other challenge is the idea of an open community. Is that we spent a good part of a decade, or even more, probably since day one, fighting or engaging in the kind of standard reputational spaces of scholarly communication, which were around impact factors and these kinds of prestige orders, and we are proud of how far we've got down that road, and how we've addressed those kinds of institutional gatekeepers that were there for good reasons, and for also the complicated underbellies that we also understand of determining value of scholarly communication through these impact standards. So we now enter a brand new world where it feels like, or it can be at sometimes, that there are similar kind of gatekeepers that aren't always as supportive of people who are transitioning into OA. And it's not that it's a personal kind of lack of support, but it's just, like I would guess, and I sense it's the overwhelming workload that is involved in transitions. But within that, sometimes you feel like there is a picking and choosing of winners accidentally, and so as a small publisher, you have the institutions that are the traditional, you have publishers that have been in open access from its early days in scholarly communication. You have the big players that are already established that are shifting across, and as we meet the demands of those two pillars within the open access community, to find a voice within that, and to feel supported within that transition, rather than having barriers that are sometimes put up, which you have to keep jumping over in a technical and content sense, can be challenging. Where that all comes together is, when thinking about what is the place for small publishers, is how does the open community or the open access community actually support you know, people like you'll hear from today, who are wanting to make the transition, who are fearful that they could be left behind in the transition, and you know, primarily the advocates of their authors and content. And so it's not just a, you know, a concern of what to do with your business model, but it's also a concern of you as the publisher, who is the guardian of your content as well.
Thank you so much, Philip. And we'll jump straight into the next presentation from James from White Horse Press. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Romy, and hello, everybody. I'm James Rice. I'm a partner at the White Horse Press. We're a very small academic publisher in the UK. It's a family-run firm, been going for about 30 years. We publish 5 journals in all. 4 of them are hybrid, mostly subscription, but we do allow open access articles. We have 1 fully Diamond open access journal, and we have a new open access one launching next year. And we publish 4 or 5 books a year. At the moment, a mix of open access and traditional. Last year, we published 79 research articles and 7 were open access, which is 9%. This year so far, 9 out of 44, so that's 20%. So that's the trend, and we hope that that continues. In terms of current open access models, we've offered green open access for all of our journals since 2007. So that's a start, but it's not really sufficient to be fully open access. We do accept APCs in our hybrid journals, our 4 kind of established subscription journals. The uptake on those is very low. I mean, pretty minimal, really, just a handful every year. And I guess we have concerns, or we're not sure how to work an APC model in a way that's actually fully equitable, because it makes us nervous to rely too much on APCs, because we don't want there to be a kind of mismatch, or mismatch of opportunity between authors at wealthier institutions and less wealthy. We do have our 1 Diamond open access journal is fully supported by a sponsor, which is great, very convenient and lovely, but it's hard to replicate, we found, for other journals, and it's potentially unstable in as much as if we lost that sponsor, I'm not quite sure what we would do to keep that journal open access. It would be quite a shock to the system, as it were. We have launched a Subscribe to Open campaign for 1 of our 4 subscription journals for 2023, and so far the response has been really good. We're hopeful that Subscribe to Open is an approach that would allow a very small firm such as ours to become sustainably open access with our journal publications in future. If the first one goes well, we'll try others, but we have to see how we get on with the first one. Other open access models, read and publish agreements, I know that works for lots of publishers. We really are absolutely tiny, and it seems to us, although I'd be delighted to be proved wrong, but it seems to us difficult to impossible at our scale to really do read and publish agreements or anything like them in a meaningful way. Almost everything we publish is interdisciplinary. Our authors are spread all over the world. We don't have, a small number of institutions where we have multiple authors publishing multiple articles or anything like that. So the landscape seems quite hard for us to do that kind of agreement. And at the same time, we're conscious that, that it would probably be difficult for a lot of libraries and institutions to find the time to, invest in doing a sort of deal with someone at our scale. APC-led models, like I said, we'd ideally like to avoid charging APCs just because we want to, maintain a strictly fair playing field for all the authors. We're aware that other publishers have ways of mitigating that problem, but if we can find a way to do it without APCs, we'd be a bit happier. And we've had some very helpful conversations with helpful people, including at JISC and Lyrasis and people in kind of consortia environments. And we're hoping that there may be opportunities to access open access support through arrangements such as JISC's open access community framework. We're not sure if we're eligible for that one, but something like that would be good. And that's the kind of infrastructure that might allow us, despite our small scale, to form helpful relationships with libraries and institutions without necessitating direct one-to-one deals or contracts. In terms of why we are wanting to go open access, I mean, as a matter of principle, it's all of the things which I think drive a lot of people's move to open access, and we want to broaden access for readers, boost the profile for our authors by increasing readership, improve the profile and metrics for the journals. Obviously, if they're read more widely, cited more widely, that's really good for the journals and for the authors and everybody. We also want to increase impact in the fields and causes we support. We have reasons, of course, for focusing on specifically environmental perspectives in the humanities and social sciences. And if the more widely our publications are read, we feel the more we're doing to actually support those kinds of thinking and perspectives. So those we would see as just generally, good results that would come from being more open access. There's also the question of business continuity, I guess echoing some of what Philip was saying. Obviously, the move to open access is a very fundamental change in the industry, as everybody knows full well. And we expect there to be a time when it's no longer really viable for a company like ours to survive if we're not properly open access. So we really feel we need to move now to ensure that we can survive for the long term, because if we leave it too long, there's a reasonable risk that we'll come to some tipping point and be in a seriously dangerous position for the maintaining our business and maintaining the journals and books that we publish. So we want to move now, be ready, and try to push as far ahead as we can while there's time to do so. Other open access initiatives we're involved in or hoping to be, we've joined the Open Access Switchboard, and we're currently working on understanding how that can, how we can work with that to open up better opportunities. We would love to be part of the Open Book Collective, which is launching or has launched this summer. Again, we're not sure if we're eligible, but again, that's another example of infrastructure that we feel has potential to make it more realistic for a very tiny firm such as ours to potentially access support from institutions, again, without requiring anybody to necessarily be in lots of separate direct relationships that might be hard to maintain. We're a member of OASPA. We're trying to flip some more backlist books via Knowledge on Latch. We flipped a couple last year. And again, we've been having really helpful conversations with JISC and with others as well about arrangements there might be to get in touch with libraries and access support that way, or institutions and access support that way. So challenges for us in moving to open access, one is just low capacity. As I said, we're a tiny company. We have no employees. It's just us, the partners, roughly the equivalent of 2.5 full-time people. Shifting to open access is obviously a fundamental change to our business model. We need to think much more like a service provider than we kind of have traditionally. And making any kind of fundamental change to a business takes time and effort and focus, but we have to keep on publishing the books and journals in the meantime. So taking out a lot of time to do other developmental work is challenging when you just have a very low core capacity to begin with. A large part of our work, generally speaking, is maintaining networks in our fairly narrow subject areas. That takes a lot of our effort. But to really, become open access and thrive in the new world that's emerging, we're aware that we need to build networks much more widely, including with parties who have never heard of us and don't know who we are and what we do. And that again takes a lot of work and focus, which is fine. We know we need to do that, but again, proportionally, because there are not many of us, and no one we can ask to help us with it, it's sometimes hard to find the capacity to put as much effort into it as we know is required. Obviously, there's lots of uncertainty around open access. As everybody knows, the landscape is evolving very rapidly. It's not clear what models might prevail in a few years. From our perspective, we don't want to be locked into a particular way of doing it. But again, being very, very tiny, that's a little bit difficult because it takes a large proportion of our time, even just to do the basic research and investigation on what some new model might be. And so it's that sort of disproportionate requirement on our time that can be quite hard, given that it's just really 2 or 3 people, well, 3 people really. I think publishers of any scale probably have questions around the sustainability of open access models and understanding which models are likely to be sustainable, and that's the same for us as well. And finally, one thing that we're aware is possibly a risk is that open access revenue seems likely to be a bit more jumpy or less uniform, like temporally uniform than traditional publishing revenue. I might be wrong about that, but that seems to be likely. And then that can potentially, present some risks for a very small business in terms of maintaining a stable, cash flow to just deal with the humdrum running of the business. So that's us, White Horse Press. We're committed to moving towards open access. We want to be as open access as we can, as soon as we can, and we're doing what as much as we're able to move in that direction now. Well, we have the time to do it, not in an awful scramble. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, James. And then lastly, I'd like to hand over to Tony Gunnison from University of Wisconsin Press. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Romy, and hello, everyone. I'm Journals Manager at University of Wisconsin Press, and we publish 12 humanities and social science journals. They are all hybrid journals at this point. So they have some articles that are published Gold OA supported by APCs. You know what, I realized I should have mentioned, I manage the journals and I know more about that, but we publish 50 to 60 academic books per year as well, or academic and trade books. So in 2021, we published 306 articles in total, and 29 of those were open access, so 9.5%. In 2022, we published 320 articles in total, and 36 of those were open access, which brought it up just a little bit to 11.3%. These numbers are a little bit, I don't want to say, I guess inflated, I don't know. For 2022, we've had a request by one journal came in with funding to publish an entire special issue, a themed issue, open access. And so we did publish one issue that way, which skewed our numbers. I mean, across the board, they're skewed a little higher, considering that we're not all the way through the year yet. So we have, as mentioned, we have hybrid open access. Green OA is available for all articles. We have for our social science journals, we have a certain number of authors come in with funding from either the US government supported, or sometimes the UK government supported research. And so they come in and they need to be deposited in an institution or some other repository. Therefore, we make that available to anyone. We do have waivers for the APCs for some of our journals, if that is absolutely necessary and not financially supportable. But as the Philip and James have mentioned, we're very concerned about the sustainability of the press overall and the journals overall if we were to allow that. And we haven't quite figured out how to deal with that in a sustainable way. So some other open access initiatives our organization is involved in 2017 and 2018, we published Diamond OA journal. It was grant supported at that time, but they lost their funding. And so unfortunately, we were only able to do that for 2 years. And the editors took it to a different publisher, and they actually, I mean, I was a little bit surprised to see that they have now flipped it to a subscription journal. They felt that it was unsupportable moving forward as a open access journal, unfortunately. So that was our one experiment that left us a little bit shy of trying other, super bold initiatives. We always make our editorials and section introductions are available open access. Supplementary materials are posted online and are not technically open access. We don't publish with a CC BY license, but they are openly readable. And I should mention, we regularly do marketing promotions where we will open up an article for a period of time to make it freely readable, which isn't, again, it's not exactly open access, but it's freely readable, which supports the goal of our authors and editors, which are generally to get a greater readership of their material. That's really the push that we get on our end, is more from authors and editors that want to see a broader readership rather than funders. And this fall, our books is participating in a Big Ten Academic Alliance ebook pilot program. Sorry, I really don't have a lot more detail on that. I know that there is something coming up, but I'm not personally involved in that. Next slide, please. Some of our challenges are that our humanities and social science journals just don't have funding available to support APCs. And And we haven't been able to find any grant supported, any ways of supporting them in that sort of way, aside from our one trial. We would love to do that in an ideal world. We would be delighted to do that, but we haven't found a way to make that happen yet. We are interested in the trials that other presses are doing in the subscribe to open trials. We are cautiously optimistic that those will go well and that we can trial those in a couple of years, but we're not at that point just yet. In some cases, as Philip mentioned, that authors are maybe not aware of open access, like this isn't even in their radar in the arts and humanities. We run into that as well. And in some cases, we've had authors that actively do not wish to have their material published open access. They want to reuse it at a later date and have it be part of a book or something like that. And they have a little, they would like a little more control over it, and they're not interested in open access. And then finally, for some of our journals are very tightly affiliated or associated with a society, and the society relies on the surpluses we are able to provide them through subscription fees. And it would be financially not sustainable for the society to not have that money. So that is a third challenge that we run into. And I believe that that is what I have for opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. There's a lot in there in all of your presentations, and then that Phil started us off with as well was about educating authors, right, and having to explain open access to them. Is that something that you all still face challenges with? Like one, Tony, you talked a little bit about explicit wishes of authors not to publish open access. Do you think it's perhaps an educational thing as well?
It perhaps is, excuse me. In some cases, I'm really not sure if I just think that they're at cross purposes. I think that the authors have a different goal in mind. Yeah, I'm not sure. In some cases, I don't think that education is the answer.
Yeah, I mean, some authors obviously driven by things like funding requirements. In the UK, we've seen this with UKI funding demands, for example, where that forces the author in a way to educate themselves and to understand, well, what are my options? How can I comply with my funder? So perhaps that is also linked to the funding requirements. And like you said, for your authors, that's not really played a part yet.
Yes, I should mention that the majority of our authors are US-based authors. That's not true across the board, but the majority are. So I think that shapes the requests for open access and the understanding of it, because we're not having the funder demands that James would have, for example.
Yeah, and from our perspective, I mean, I would say that the majority of our authors are either open to or enthusiastic about open access, but there are definitely some who are not particularly interested. Because our open access journal is like natively open access, and people will only submit articles there if they want to publish open access. So, and our subscription journals, they only go open access if the author decides to bring an APC. So the problem about authors actually resisting open access hasn't really been an issue for us, because it's sort of up to them which way they go and whether they want to publish in these journals. But yeah, I mean, I haven't picked up much on authors not being aware of open access, sometimes not aware of how it actually like works at a more practical level. So you know, with people who want to be open access, but they don't know how it works. So that would require some kind of education. But generally speaking, I do probably agree with what Tony was saying, that it's yeah, it's just that if they don't want to, they actually don't want to, or they're not interested.
Yeah. Would you agree with that, Phil?
Yeah, look, I think it's you know, what both Tony and James have said, it brought some more complexity to this education. You know, part of the education is often, you know, people think open access and don't connect it with an APC fee structure, you know, and there's a kind of expectation. Look, there's such a range of authors and their experiences, and so that interface where, you the kind of front end of the commercialism of scholarly communication is, face to face with the author, is that there is some kind of explanation at times. Also, if authors don't have a funding base or an understanding of the access to the funding base they can to pay these APCs, sometimes the kind of anger is at the publisher. It's like, why have you set up this system for me? And there's a kind of fundamental disconnect between philosophy and the economics of what we do. Is often, open access is thought in the cognitive space as this is free. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And there is a tension in this expectation. So there's one tension which I'm understanding of, right? Which is authors say, my content, I deliver this content to you as a kind of source of free labor. You know what I mean? So I do it for free. So why don't you do it for free, kind of thing? You know what I mean? And the thing is that academics don't do it for free because they earn an income in a different income space. And publishers, this is their primary industry, and it requires people with technical expertise. There is infrastructural demands. There is a real financial reality to what publishing is. That's a valuable contribution to the ecosystem of research communities. And so we are kind of put in a kind of combative space sometimes when, we're all trying to work towards the same goals, but there's this balance of you are critiquing free labor in an ecosystem, but you're demanding it in another space. And so it's that kind of nuanced conversations with people who are not, it's not your average, and I hate to say the word, but it's not your average consumer. These are, intelligent people that are well-versed in the principles of why they do what they do. And so are we. And so how do you make sense of what this is, and to be, and the kind of economic this is a change in business, and we've got to be clear about this. It's a change in the business of what we do, and the kind of public good that sits behind it. There was a public good in the business before open access. And so how can we keep these engines going and not fall into the trap of privileging the established players who already have a dominant position within the field?
Yeah, and that's we're linking to talk a little bit about libraries, perhaps, because you talked at the start, Phil, about the big players, and obviously bigger publishers have been signing read and publish agreements with libraries, but they also had existing relationships with libraries. So there's the argument that do these agreements just replace the previous subscription agreements, the big deals? And from what we talked a little about in the prep call, is that in a lot of your cases, you work with subscription agents that sell your journals, so you don't have direct relationships with libraries.
Yes.
Perhaps you can talk a little bit about that. James, I know you've done some direct outreach to libraries for your Subscribe to Open journal. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. Phil, do you want to go first and I'll pick up after?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so, there is two dynamics to this. Firstly, we have subscription agents who are the interface between us and the libraries predominantly, and for good or bad, that is how we've been content focused. We do the things we know well, and that's been a kind of thing that we have worked through them. The other dynamic to that is that we don't always have, we may have one title at one institution, another title at a different institution. So even within the library itself, there is not a kind of weight behind, it's not like you are taking all of our titles, that's very rare. You just have a little slice of what is the research interest and the demand from your institution. And so it's a double thing, is that firstly, there's a kind of distance between being able to communicate with the good folks in libraries, which we want to be a part of. This is an important conversation. And in fact, often these agents try and, keep publishers and librarians, and people that work in this ecosystem apart, and so that's one thing. But the other thing is that even if you want to go the different route, if I talk to a big institution and say, hey, we have two titles with you. You know, it's not a conversation that, you know, I feel bad that at times I'm wasting, well, not wasting the time because it's always worth the time, but on the scale of their priorities and the work that they need to do, I can understand why the call to me or the email to me is the last email. So, you know, these are kind of institutional challenges that we all face, and particularly for those who want to do the right thing.
Yeah, and I mean, on our side, similarly, we use a subscription agent for all of our subscriptions and have done for many years. So one result of that, which was a bit of a challenge when we decided to go for a subscribe to open campaign, was that we really had no, apart from maybe a tiny handful, but no direct relationships or you know, with libraries or librarians or any of our subscribers, except for that small handful. We were able to get a you know, subscriber list, and you know, the agent tracks GDPR consents and all this, so we were able to actually then get hold of the contact list and do a kind of outreach mailing, and that was fine. So at least we've been able to get the word out as for our subscribe to open campaign. But what we don't have is a history of being in contact with essentially our customers, and that is probably a weakness, I guess. You know, it seems like we'd be in a stronger position now to communicate with our customers about, you know, who we are and what our values are and why it would be, you know, why what we're doing is perhaps worth supporting for open access, if we did have that history of direct contact. So, but you know, that's something that maybe we just need to build up from now. If we're going to be open access, we need to really build that network and focus on that, whereas before it wasn't necessary in a traditional subscription model.
Yeah. What about you, Tony? Especially because you're based at a university, I assume there's some contact with the library at your university?
Well, yeah, well, yes and no. We're actually physically located within the library. And we do meet with them and work with them, but we're actually in a very similar situation to James in that we use subscription agents for many of our institutional subscriptions, and it's not, I mean, that's just how this business is run. That is just kind of standard where, libraries prefer to work with one agent and subscribe to their 20 journals or however many journals, rather than managing each individual relationship with each publisher for one journal. You know, it makes it much more efficient from their end. So, yeah. It is a challenge.
Yeah, I agree, because yeah, well, that's right. How is it a good use of time for the library or for us to be having those direct contacts? But then if you don't have that kind of direct contact or build those relationships in an open access world where it's really important about making the case for why the publication is valuable and brings a public good, and when, you know, why, you know, we as a particular publisher have a certain set of values and we have a mission that goes beyond just being a business. Communicating that seems to be an important part of encouraging the support that we'll need to be open access. But you're right. Then if the customers, the end customers, the libraries ultimately don't have the capacity or the interest in having those direct conversations, it's a challenge how to put one's case across.
Do you see then that subscription agents, in a way, I don't want to say are the gatekeepers of open access, but there's a role for them, like a bigger role for them to play in this transition for smaller publishers like yourselves, to be more maybe open to libraries, to push models like subscribe to open?
I'll chime in on that. I don't know. I mean, obviously in subscribe to open, it's one of the advantages of subscribe to open is that we can continue to use the same infrastructure. There's very little administrative change, and that is really helpful. I'm not sure. I mean, I guess it would depend on what the interest and capability of a particular subscription agent is, as to whether they would be prepared to and capable of, you know, to make this case, which isn't about just here's a renewal, so we're going to process the subscription. That's very practical day-to-day stuff. Whereas it's a sort of a different thing to be actually putting forward a pitch or a case as to why something needs support.
And essentially, subscribe to open is just renewing your existing subscriptions, but like you said, there's a little bit more communication behind that.
Yeah, that's right, because you've got to say why it's worth doing beyond the fact that it's just a journal that people want in their library, you know, want to have access to. So yeah, I guess I don't know if I have an answer to that question myself, but I guess it would depend on who the subscription agent is and what they're capable of.
Do you know, and I really hadn't given it thought until we had started having these conversations, you know, regarding this these presentations here. So we haven't discussed this with him, and we ourselves are not running a subscribe to open trial. I would think that at least some of the larger agents would be happy to do that. For some of our foreign agents, it might be, you know, there might be communication difficulties and it might be more difficult. But I would think that certainly the very large agents would have an interest. I should think that they would develop an interest in working with publishers to try to, do a subscribe to open, because as you say, it's going to use the same infrastructure. I mean, that's the real benefit of using it, is that all the infrastructure pretty much stays the same.
Yeah, look, I see this as the Kodak problem. So, you know, Kodak was one of the first people to get the, chip for digital cameras, right? And so they feared, the film business is going to be destroyed, even though they had the technologies, they had the tool, they had the infrastructure that to, particularly for larger organizations to see a kind of transition to what you describe, even if it's, the infrastructure is there, is sometimes hard to imagine. And that's the kind of thing that changes organizations, is what is our business if we don't, produce film? And, so, and from our experience, we have, we have distributors that are large and, they are not, they're not positive or they're not receptive. I have pushed it. I've asked it just to see what can happen. And, there's a kind of, yes, we're doing this in this area, but it's not what we are talking about here. So that kind of resistance is understandable. But, it, again, we are talking about being, put in precarious positions.
Interesting. Thanks, Phil. Maybe stick with you then, talk a little bit about technical demands. I know you've had some experiences recently where you want to talk a little bit about this, where you've had issues with journals and formats and from a technical point of view.
Yes, look, you know what, again, I said from the start is that I have a positive framework and point of view for all of these institutions, but, there are, open access indexing and database bodies and authorities that have emerged for good reasons. And the kind of criteria to be in, added to these databases, to be linked to these databases, a lot isn't about the content. I've always been so focused on it's the content that gets you into, the world of databases. And now it feels like some of these databases are not as, of course, they're concerned with content, but it's really the technical requirements, of how does your website operate, where things live, where content lives, the kinds of ways that you describe yourself. This is a big thing to ask, publishers to, transform or reconsider. And again, we are thinking on the scale of small publishers, small independent, not-for-profit society publishers, the ones that you have on this panel now, and, already we are investing in the infrastructure of the things that we do. And this is like, this is the next layer, which feels like another gatekeeper. It's sort of like all the things that we tried to move away in those early principles of what open access was to try and, break these economic, epistemological, gatekeepers that sit around the research that is produced by our authors, that it's another kind of, what I hope is that we don't fall into another kind of bureaucratic overlay, which, undermines the actual principles of what we are trying to do here.
Yeah.
I've been reading the
Q&As, yeah. I was gonna say.
Q&A, and the last question I think is the question, and it's an interesting one too, right? And the question is, perhaps the publishers need to be based within university systems so that where they are paid their salary by the institution, that they can publish without charging author fees. Now, this gets the heart of it all in this sense. Firstly, the infrastructure. Most university presses are overworked, underpaid, and financially precarious as they are. The other thing is that, are we creating new silos? And this is, I don't know, you know what I mean, of where my institution has one journal for my people and that's it, or are they funding the research through these institutions for other institutions, right? And so that's why, the idea of having, the importance of the publisher as a kind of interface, translator, supporter of these communities is a really important part for us to consider. And we're all trying to move in the right direction or open options to where the world may go. And so the role of universities in being able to fund what this transition is, the role of governments to be able to fund what this transition is. It's not that the money is going to leave the system, it's all going to be still there. And it's just where it happens and how it happens and who, and do we want a diverse set of players out there supporting what we're doing.
Yeah. We've got.
Sorry,
go ahead, Tony.
Just very quickly, because I am at a university press and we are part of the university. Can I say that well, I don't know that I should speak for all university presses, but I think we would be delighted with that solution. But I don't think that is forthcoming. For those of you who may follow university presses in the United States, as you may know, Kentucky and Missouri and Kansas all were threatened with being shut down in the past 5 to 7 years because the universities demand that we make money and don't lose money. And it is generally not a profit-making business to publish in the fields that we publish in. I think that the way we think about it within presses like our press, I don't even want to speak for our press, but I will say, so I think that there are library-based publishers that act a little bit more like a service bureau, and at least some of those focus more on publishing materials from that university. But in general, university presses publish from authors who are all over the world. They are absolutely not associated, tightly associated with authors at their university. They may have authors at their university or editors at their university that are published in a journal, but that's not the focus of it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Tony. Let's talk a little bit about business models, and we have a question there as well in the Q&A that was directed towards James in terms of, is there a thing such as a future-looking sustainability in publishing anyway? And if authors don't like the publisher for whatever reason, sustainability will suffer. Are there any models that you think aren't out there yet that should be considered more, that are sustainable? James, you've talked about subscribe to open. Do you see that as a sustainable solution if it goes as you imagine?
Well, about subscribe to open, all I can say is I hope so, but I don't know. I mean, to the specific question that the attendees asked there, yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, there's always financial uncertainty in any kind of business, and publishing, traditional publishing, is no different, clearly. I mean, I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess aside from the kind of like basic financial sustainability, there's the question of the model sustainability. So the company I am part of has worked for just over 30 years, and it's always been the same model. The model has been sustainable, even though there's been good years and bad years, and there are threats and subscriptions decline, and there's financial risk, and maybe it isn't sustainable financially, but the model has been sustainable. The company survived on essentially the same model. Whereas in open access, I think there's a question about model sustainability. Like, we could go to subscribe to open. Will subscribe to open even exist in 4 years? I don't know. I mean, I hope so. It seems like a pretty good way to do things from what I can tell now, but I don't know if it'll exist, and maybe some other model will take over. So I suppose that's alongside the financial sustainability problem, which would affect any kind of business or most businesses, I suppose. There's this question about whether the model itself is sustainable, given that there seems to be like rapid development in what the models are. I hope that at least in some way responds to the question there. And Romy, you were asking about subscribe to open. I mean, I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think anybody knows whether it will survive. And I guess that's part of the challenge that we need to. There's just a lot of uncertainty around it. As to other models that might work or be more sustainable. Again, I don't think I have an answer to that, because a lot of it is so new. It's certainly new to us. And I've thought more about subscribe to open because that's the one that seems most realistic for us to actually implement. Whereas read and publish agreements, maybe they are very sustainable as a business model, but unless somebody can show me the way, I don't know how we can do them.
There's a question as well from Julie Lambert about hybrid journals and whether you allow open access or advertise the possibility openly to authors, or is it only available if someone makes an inquiry? What's the kind of prompt to authors?
Can I answer that? At least for us, it's on our license to publish form or our consent form. So it's made a little more prominently now than it had been in the past because there are more author inquiries. So it's just right there. But I will say that authors frequently still miss it or don't quite understand. We think that we've been very clear, but authors still misunderstand it at times. Yeah,
and I think this it's similar in our case. I mean, we make it very publicly known. I mean that we are happy to take APCs and publish open access. Maybe we should be more proactive about that and embed it into email templates that are going out from the submission system and everything, and maybe that would lead to a bit more. So yeah, but we definitely try to let people know. Yeah.
And definitely my experience working with workflow is that the earlier you make authors aware of it and the clearer you present it, the more uptake there would be. That there's definitely that kind of element of communication within the workflow at different stages.
Yeah.
We're close to running out of time, so I'll give you just a couple of minutes each or seconds to briefly talk a little bit about what's next in your organization to close up. James, you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. I mean, for our organization, we've been working for, I guess, maybe 8 months or so now. 8 months ago was when we made the decision to really try to focus on going open access. We realized that this was the way we were going to go. And I think we need to just carry on doing that. The next main milestone is seeing whether our first subscribe to open initiative works. And if it does, then I think we would then try to extend that to other journals and hopefully get up to a much larger proportion of our content published open access that way. And likewise, we'll continue exploring and trying to become part of these various initiatives, which are, I guess you would describe them all as kind of infrastructure initiatives that can provide an interface between very small publishers and the libraries and institutions who control the funding that might help us thrive more in an open access way, because those seem like seem realistic and potentially feasible as long as we're eligible to join them and they work. Those seem like good routes to explore for us. And beyond that, what's next? A new journal launching next year, another one we're going to try to get momentum behind next year, both fully open access if we can manage it, and just carrying on publishing things.
Thanks, James. Tony, very quickly.
Very quickly, we what's next is a little bit modest. We anticipate more fully open access issues of a journal that's like a special themed issue. And then we're just watching to see what happens with subscribe to open. We're interested in experimenting with it, but I don't think that we're quite ready to do that until we see some results from some other publishers.
Philip?
Yeah, look, for us, it's just to hold on, find partners and listen to what our authors and their communities are really asking for, and trying to project what the needs will be in the next 20, 30 years, because we hope to be around then.
I hope you will. Sure you will be. Well, I think that's time to wrap up now. Unfortunately, we're out of time. This has been so interesting. I'm sure we could all talk for a little bit longer. Thanks everyone for joining us. If we didn't answer your question, we'll do that and get back to you. If you're interested in joining any future events that I host, please join the Kronos Hub newsletter and events list. We've got 3 webinars coming up in September. We're talking about tracking open access usage, then Reversoy, October, preprint posting and open access publishing, and then at the end of November, open access and research metrics. So I hope you can join me. They're all recorded, so if you can't make it live, just sign up and we'll email out the recording. And if there's any questions, please feel free to get in touch. My email's there, and I can happy to forward any questions to any of the speakers from today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, and thank you, Romy, for organizing.
Yes, thank you.
Bye.